Hello and welcome to this week's pattern cutting, pattern hacking live with me, Charlotte. If you haven't joined me before, I started out as a designer. Then I fell in love with pattern cutting because it actually lets you make the clothes you want to make from your own designs. And then I also started teaching. So that's what I've been doing for the last 12 years as well. And I'm here every Thursday, most of the time, at lunchtime to dive into some beautiful vintage fashion ideas and see how we can get inspired by them to design our own clothes and pattern hack our existing patterns. And pattern hacking, I always see it as just a quick way of designing your own clothes because you're using something you already have. It might be a pattern you drafted yourself, maybe with me even, on my website. If you'd like to do the same, do have a look in the description after the live stream. I will put in the links for you, or from an existing sewing pattern, because I think once you've gone through the work of drafting or printing out your pattern, cutting it out, fitting it, it's you don't just want to stop at one design, you want to make a few to get the most out of it. And my background is in commercial fashion design. That's what we all do. So most fashion design companies, you might do one completely new style or two, and a lot of the time it's reinterpreting what you already have because you know it fits and you know people like it. And most of us, we don't want something completely different each year. We want something which fits into our wardrobe, and which is what pattern hacking basically is. And today, as it is July, it's summer, I thought it'd be nice to look at some summer sleeves to inspire us and find out some different ideas for creating your own. So for all of these styles, you either need a sleeveless styles, because I'm going to start out with sort of grown on short sleeves. So these are the sort of little extended shoulders and the ideas you can have for them. And then also I will be going through some ideas for just your normal sleeves, and we're gonna so focus on volume and also some nice details. And I always think summer sleeves are a really good way of having fun with your sleeve, because I live in the UK. For most of the year you need to wear a jacket or a cardigan or a coat. So summer is a time where you can add lots of details and volume to your sleeves without having to think, if I put a cardigan on top of that, it's going to look like I'm the Hulk and I've got massive muscles suddenly. So I always love summer for having a bit of fun with your sleeves without having to worry how it fits in with your rest of your outfit. So I'm going to have a look at these sort of 4 ideas in a minute. But first of all, oh, hello Natalie, and hello Jen, and hello Saskia. Lovely to have you all on here. And if you're watching, if you haven't said hello, do feel free to pop into the chat. And yeah, let me know what is there any sort of sleeves you're interested in, or do you like statement sleeves? I love some. I see at the moment there's a big, going back, I think it's still at 80s 90s influence, the big sleeves. And with me, my shoulders are quite athletic, so that always just looks like too big for my frame. But I love them other people, so it's like sometimes with these styles as well, you can appreciate it even if you don't wear it yourself. So I'll be exploring both high impact styles but also low impact styles as well. So let's get started with grown on styles. And the reason why I wanted to explore that, first of all, because it's perfect for summer, because it's basically sort of, I will show you a vintage example. This is a really good example of it. It's sleeves which basically part of your bodice, which is often quite a big armhole, and it just sort of cover your shoulder. And I love these for I've got quite a few tops. If you've been with me for a while, you might have seen me. I've got silk tops with that sort of grown on sleeve, and I've also got some linen tops. And of course the nice thing is that they cover your shoulders so you don't get your sunburn there. And they're also really easy because you don't have to put a satin sleeve. It's just an extension of your bodice block. But what can happen, and I've done it as well, is that if you aren't careful with any of these grown-on sleeves, um, because it's basically just, if you, the most basic one is a straight shoulder, and because of how the fabric sits and how where the straight of grain is, quite often what happens is it goes down, and then it sort of kicks up, and there's nothing you can do to basically hold it flat, just because of how the fabric is, how a shoulder interferes. So that's always one of the downfalls of the really basic design, if you're careful. If it's oversized or like a sort of relaxed top, it works fine because it just falls nicely. But quite often, sometimes you see it with certain styles where it's too maybe tight or slightly too long, and then it gets that kick and you can't actually avoid it. And you can see here I've avoided it by making it more complicated on this image, by actually having a little gusset underneath. And I will switch over to my table and talk about it in a bit more detail now, on the different ways of doing it. And let's have a look what Natalie's saying. And Natalie's saying the sleeves on Cressis's characters in Bridgerton were certainly statement sleeve. Yeah, Bridgerton has lots of big sleeves, and I haven't watched I only watched the first 2 seasons, so I'm probably behind the times. But yes, I think it's actually quite a lot of them sort of Regency time with big sleeves. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about. They go so big, it can be a little bit overwhelming, but it can be a real statement as well, depending on your style even. Okay, let's move over. So what I mean by grown-on sleeves is a sleeve which grows out of the bodice. So your bodice looks something like that. So at its most basic, a grown-on sleeve is something like that. And what we normally do with it is we extend the shoulder, and then the whole bodice normally becomes bigger as well. So you end up with a style like that, which works fine most of the time. But sometimes what you do is you get your sleeve looks like this, because of course, depending on the angle of your shoulder, what you end up with there is that sleeve you have basically a very off grain which stretches and doesn't want to hold still. So there's a few options how you can design with it and basically get a better fit, but also get really nice design choices. The first thing, of course, is to curve your shoulder. And if you look at the vintage example in the pattern, that's exactly what they've done. So this is more about fitting. So theirs is more like this. So it's basically a nice curve, and you can use your grown-on sleeve drafting method to do this. And we actually had that sort of topic come up in the Q&A. If you're one of my students, you'll remember it. So what you can basically do is you do a beginning of a grown-on sleeve, and then it looks something like that. But can you see what would happen if you do that? So that you actually curve it down, you have a really nice grown-on sleeve. It becomes smaller and smaller, your armhole. So what tends to happen is that, because you basically, when your cutout point is here for raising your arm, so what happens is if you start raising your arm, your whole dress goes up because there isn't enough space. So that's one of the things to consider. So you can see even there on top of your arm, there's quite a lot of space to allow you some movement. And then the other thing we can do at the other side is that you also add some sort of gusset. So here we've done a really nice, I've done it something like here, like a gusset like this. So it looks like it's grown on, but it's actually got the full movement underneath, so you can have lots of movement down here. So that's one way of adding volume. I wanted to show you a real life example of how you can also add some more volume, and how you can have like the next example I'm going to show you. I've got some real garments today. Is is basically a version of this, but instead of curving our shoulder, we're adding a little volume. So again, you can use any sewing pattern with a basic roll-on sleeve, or you can literally extend your shoulder on a dress you have. But what they've done on this one, you might have seen in my stories yesterday, I've been just making it. This is a completely straight shoulder seam, but by gathering it in, you get a slightly curved shoulder. So if I put that on the table, you can see here, this is a completely straight line, but by gathering it, you get a little nice curved. So this is like a cheats version of getting something more fitted, but having a really basic pattern. So it's literally just an extension of a shoulder. And if you, this dress is sort of, you could use any existing sort of summer dress, not too fitted. And then you literally just make your shoulder longer, and you end up with a really weird armhole. You end up with an armhole which looks like this. And then to get a slightly better fit, you just start literally, it's not a lot of gathers, but you gather in just the top third, until you get a drop of maybe about 1.5 centimeters each side, and it just gives you, rather than a wing going up, it basically curves slightly around, but it's a much easier pattern to draft, and it's still really easy to stitch. And also by having the binding around, it gives you a really nice finish. It sort of edges everything, because quite often when you put a facing on it, it doesn't want to lay flat. So I always think these styles, they look really straightforward, but to get, because they're so simple, it's actually really hard to get them right. Now I've got one dress I made right at the beginning, and it literally has that, and it's so annoying because you can't fix it once you cut it out. So it's about learning exactly the curves you need, the angles, or how by gathering it in you can avoid it. But it's just a really quick, really easy pattern hack. If you, for example, already maybe have a sewing pattern like that and you cut it out and it does the weird thing, you can just gather it in slightly. So it's a really a little pattern hack to do post when you're already in the project and it's just annoying you. And this really depends on the fabric as well. So some fabrics behave really nicely and stable, other fabrics they don't basically want to do it. So it's always sort of maybe even trying it out at the angle and see where it's got the tendency to sort of because it basically stretches, and then the end where we've got the facing and the seam, that sort of stays stable, which is why we got that weird effect. So it's one of those things you can't always fully avoid. It's sort of a design feature, but we can make it a lot better by choosing a better style to work for it, and also by making little alterations to it. The opposite way to go, if you want a grown-on sleeve, because of course the version I just showed you does restrict movement a bit again, because it looks really pretty, but you are sort of, you can go towards sort of here, and then it's the whole top or dress will start moving, which is why we normally have that gap on top. One way to avoid it is actually to add lots of volume. That also makes it super easy to fit, because even with the vintage example here, because it's got gusset, you will have some, you're still doing your normal sleeve fitting, and the next version is really for if you ever tried a grown-on sleeve and it didn't really work, the next version is for you, because it's basically taking away all the fitting issues, and that is to add lots of volume. So here's an example with a bow as well, but I'm also going to show you another real life example. I'm all about I normally only have images, but for some reason I got several real life examples. So this is a vintage pattern. It's 4420, so it's quite old. I think it's from the 40s. But you can see this has got the really nice extension. But what it is, it's a grown-on sleeve, but instead of it being really fitted and curved, which means you really have to drop your armhole, which you see in a lot of Claire McCardle styles, or you have to do lots of shaping at your gusset or your raglan. They've added a lot of volume, which does the same. And I'm going to show you on the paper how it looks like. So we've got these three here. So this one is basically, instead of, if you have a normal grown-on sleeve on its most basic, would look something like this. So that's a typical grown-on sleeve. So you can see you've got a slight curve, and then of course that angle always, the further low down you go, the better it looks when you're standing still. The further up you go, the more volume you'll get, but also which means more movement, but it also means more volume underneath your arms. So it's most extreme. You could just have a straight seam, but that means if you have your arms down, you get lots of volume there. And if you look at some vintage Claire McCardle styles, you see lots of drapes there. So it's always a compromise you have to do between full movement and looking pretty when you're standing still. And it's always, what's more important? It depends, of course, on the occasion as well. I always go towards looking more pretty, which is why I like to put in a gusset, which does the same, but it does it more concentrated. By adding lots of volume, what you basically do is you end up with a pattern where we go with the full volume like this, and we normally only do it on a, sorry, this is really badly drawn, don't know what I was doing. So that's my front neck, my center front, and then instead of curving down like this, you can literally just extend your shoulder, and then you go down like this. So it can be something like that, or by comparison you can also have, like our example here, where we've done again lots of volume, and then it's probably something like this, and then all of this gets gathered in. So it might be this shape or it might be this shape, but you literally just gather it all in, and that will give you all the movement like a straight line, but because we're gathering it in, it basically doesn't do that sort of, it sits nicely here, and then if all the way underneath, instead it becomes basically a feature. It becomes a statement sleeve. And what's really nice with this style is by having the bow, like a fake bolero, so you got your seam here, it sort of balances out the sleeve. It sort of has, like, you have volume here and then you have volume here, so I think it pulls it all together, and sort of rather than it just being out here and then flat, it sort of pulls it in, makes it coherent, and draws your eye to the center. So I think that's a really flattering way of doing it, and all it is the center is just an extension. And of course what you can also do, because you have like a raglan seam there, you can do a little bit more fitting. So that's a really nice way of doing it. And if you remember from last week, I showed you the one-piece pattern I did, and of course I can even put it on. That has the same, again, it's a it's gonna look slightly odd, but you can see that it's exactly the same construction, but by leaving it open, you get again the volume rather than just being concentrated underneath your arm. It's sort of moving around your arm, and you get a really nice flatter sleeve. Again, you can't really wear anything on top of this, but it's all these styles I've talked so far, they're perfect for summer because they're curvy shoulders, so they're great for everyday wear and for being out in the sun, but they add really nice details, whether it's a little gathered detail like on the blue dress, or a fully gathered style like this. So lots of ideas for you. let's move on to having a look at some volume. Oh, I've got another example for that. So if you want to learn more about just the drafting principles of volume and so on, there's two video lessons on the website. One is just general volume rules for sleeve, which goes through all the different ways of adding volume to sleeves, and the second one is about sleeve heads. So that is like your big statement leg of mutton puffed sleeve, or Bridgerton sleeves. But alternatively, if you add the volume at the bottom, you get that beautiful sort of flattering sleeve, which is really nice. And I wanted to show you one example, just to show you how basic a sleeve can be, which is this top. And this complete top is made completely out of rectangles. There's not a single curved seam, but I'm actually going to put it on again. And I think this is from Mexico, and I believe it's quite a traditional way of constructing garments. There's a Mexican word for it. It's sort of a little bit what Frida, not the same, but it's a version of what Frida Kahlo wears in some of her, if you see some photos of her. But you can see when you wear it, it's actually quite a soft garment. It does, you know, like sometimes when you get zero pattern cutting, it's all quite square. This, when you put it on, it's just a really pretty summer blouse. And I'm going to take it apart in a second and show you how you get these curves and nice lines. This just squares, but this would be a really nice one for just trying it out. And if you want the proper tutorial on how to actually draft a blouse like that, let me know, because it's really fascinating just using squares. And it's also, what I love about it is how you can use just squares to draft something which looks like it's got a leg of, not like a mutton sleeve, but it looks like it's with a really curved sleeve. Sort of basically thinking outside the box. This is the opposite of flat pattern cutting to a certain degree, because we're not starting from a block which is all the curves fitted perfectly for us. We're working with perfect squares and rectangles, and then we're gathering it to basically create the curved shapes. So it's a really satisfying way of working, and it also means in a way you don't need a block or sewing pattern. You can literally work from your measurements. It's a bit like a smock as well, like a European smock as such, and you get lots of sort of Central Asian styles which use gathering again to create curves where you just have rectangles. And of course, with everything being rectangles, it's really stable on the grain, and the embroidery and the finishing is really easy. So I'm gonna move my book out of the vein, just show it to you in a little bit of detail, and you can try it out yourself, or if you want a full tutorial, do let me know. So if I lay it down, you can see, so on the neckline it's really easy. We've got a long rectangle here which is double. Actually, is it double? Yes. Just noticed. Oh, what it basically is a tube. So there's no seam up here, it's just folded over when you just got one seam. And then we got our, basically what would be our shoulder part on a normal bodice over straps. And again, you can see they're complete rectangles, and they have used lots of, it's just all done by hand with like a cotton embroidery thread. So it has a nice sort of lace work, which of course takes a lot of time. But you could also do it by machine quite easily. Just do a normal construction, so it'll be a really nice top. Only nice thing about it being done by hand, it's quite organic and flexible. When you can see, we've got our sleeve which is fully gathered. It's quite in-depth gather, and the same is done on the top. But because it's a really fine cotton, it drapes really nicely. And you can see the sleeve is gathered all the way into our shoulder section, our neckline. And then of course on a normal block, let me get my block quickly for you. Sorry, that was me looking for my blocks because my new block is in paper, so I sort of tidied up. I got some of my old blocks here. So you can see that would be like very normal. That's my neckline, and here's a shoulder. So you can see it's got a really narrow shoulders. It's sort of going slightly in, which means your gathering doesn't start quite at the end of a shoulder, which is sort of what I said earlier. For me, if it starts at the end of a shoulder, it becomes really big, and they've moved it in quite a lot, which makes it a softer one. So that's a really nice way of doing it, and it just works with squares. And then you can see the armhole goes all the way down here. So the sleeve part actually only goes halfway down the armhole, and then you can see there's a gusset, which is done. So the movement is actually in the bias. So can you see all this movement here? Because we've got the bias. So it's really clever. So the whole top, if I hold it flat now, I'm going to untie my... And I think this is something like... Maybe... I have a feeling it's from the 60s. So, you know, it's lasted amazing well. I wear it and I wash it in a bag. So because the embroidery is quite fragile, but it has been washed quite a few times because you wear it in summer, so it needs to be washed. Isn't it amazing how well everything has lasted? So you can see this is, again, it's a rectangle. If you open it up, I can't open this up, and then we basically got a massive gusset, so it's actually like a really big top, and you would think it's really unflattering or oversized. So I always think there's a lot of zero waist styles like that, they end up being quite conceptual. This actually looks like a pretty, you know, it's sort of quite conventional blouses. That's just a pretty with embroidery, nice gathered sleeve, and a nice sort of not too over the top gather around the waist area. So it is really interesting how you can adapt different pattern cutting styles such as zero waist to your own taste and still use it. And Natalie's saying the embroidered top is my favorite. Oh, it's good to know. It's mine as well. It's sort of one of those, if you see it flat, you think, you know, it's a bit of a lump, it's quite a volume, but when you wear it, it's surprisingly flattering. I think it's a very nice cotton. Again, it's old, so it drapes quite nicely. And Jenna is saying it's so clever. Yeah, I think I had this for about 10 years before I realized how clever it was. So I was just like, oh yeah, it's just an embroidered blouse, and I do love an embroidered blouse. But then I actually started looking, I think, ooh, that is clever, and how moving in the shoulder makes all the difference. It's sort of these little things you can use for yourself. But if you want to draft it yourself, do let me know. You can in the chat or in the comments later on. I can go through the whole process, but its most basic one is you literally just work out, this is how I want my neckline, my shoulders, times twice, the front and back is identical. And then you just decide how long you want your sleeve to be. And then it also sort of is defined by how deep your armhole is. So you can use that as your guide. Of course, the gusset needs to be a square, so because it folds over, if I show you. So because this is a square, that sort of defines like your armhole size. And then you just double the length. And again here, I think, you can see, if we lay that, that's a hem. The hem is one way. I think it's probably double. So you literally double it. Let's have a look whether this is the same. I think it's a bit less. And then here, it might be double. So this has to go into this section. It is double. So it's double again. So it's literally just basically working out that frame you want, and then you gather in rectangles, double the width, and you connect these two with your gusset. So it's really clever. But you know, if you wanted to make yourself a summer blouse, this would be a really nice project to get in, and you can use if you have an existing top roughly. You can use it as your guide to where you want everything fit. But then you can create quite a sort of romantic top from just squares, and it hasn't got that oversized, and a lot of smocking has as well, which is quite, I quite like how it's quite restrained. So this was just, I wanted to show you this as a sort of, not strictly pattern hacking or pattern cutting, but as a way of thinking, oh, like a summer top. And if you didn't do embroidery, you could even use an embroidered panel or some leftover remnants. It's actually really quick to cut out because it's all square, so you can literally pull it, and to stitch as well because it's all straight seams. And T Bells, hello T Bells, is saying hello, and she's saying the gusset is ingenious. A lot of the DIY patterns for similar tops are solely rectangles, and the gusset allows for a better overall fit. Yes, totally. And actually, I should have done that on this last week about perfect DIY pattern, because I think, as you said, if it was just a really big, if it's normal sleeve depth, and you get it all in, it would become really over top. But by basically gusset replacing half your sleeve, it is very much also, you know how when you draft it, if you use a gathered sleeve sewing pattern, or if you draft your own, you only add the sleeves at the top because you don't want to have too much volume at the bottom. This is again the same. It basically keeps the underarm really neat. And of course, also rather than having, if you just put a rectangle around it, you have, even if you don't add volume, you have like volume sort of coming out here. The gusset avoids that all. So it's just really clever, but really easy, and a nice way of trying out sort of pattern drafting zero waste design in a really straightforward way if you haven't done it before. And also like an alternative sort of style to most. I've looked at quite a lot of zero waste pattern cutting books just because I'm interested recently, and they all sort of follow a certain style. I like the principle of it. It's a great idea. We don't want to waste pretty fabric. Also, working with a straight of grain means it's really stable, but when actually making into clothes which fit, look pretty, and have movement. So yeah, very much unlike with a lot of DIY patterns too. So let's have a look. I wanted to show you really easy way of this is a bit of pick and mix today. There isn't as much of an overall theme as usual. I wanted to show you a really easy way of adding interest to sleeves, and I've got two, and both are great for short sleeves, summer sleeves, because again they add volume and details, so you don't really want to wear a jacket on top. So I've got this one, which is a V-neck. It doesn't look like a V-neck to me. It might not be. It might be a very late V-neck, but I always we say it's called Pinterest. It's not Pinterest V-neck, which is not fully quoted and sourced V-neck. We're not sure it's true. But can you see this is, you could use any existing sleeve with gathers and flares. You can draft your own by just adding volume all the way around, but by stitching on lace in stripes and then adding little pin tucks, it becomes a real statement sleeve. So all what you do to draft a style like that, all you need to do is to draft this is to add lots of volume to your sleeve. So if your sleeve is like that, you can literally add slash lines. Again, we only want them on the top half because you always want your underarm sleeve really nice and neat. And then you basically end up with a pattern like this where you've added lots of volume. And then all they've done, they've either used existing fabric, which you can do as well, or you literally can find some nice ribbon and you just stitch it on, and it gives you a really nice effect. And what they've done as well, they actually done little pin tucks. So I just folded the fabric and stitched it the width of your sewing machine foot window, and that gives you this really nice little tucks. It might be a little bit more, it might be the width of your sewing machine foot, but that adds a really nice detail. And you can use existing fabric, but if they come in really nice quality, they're often quite expensive, and doing it this way you can actually use whatever you want to. And I found a really nice Georgia O'Keeffe example as well. I think I mentioned it a while back, but she used it quite a lot as well. So we got one example here. So if you don't like really voluminous styles, you can see here's something else where again they just got a seam, and they've done some beautiful hand embroidery work, but it also, again, it has just an insert in the sleeve. So that's a really quick way of updating an existing sleeve pattern. You don't need to do any changes. You know, if you have a sleeveless volume, you can start stitching it on, but again, otherwise you just literally add a seam or few seams, and you could insert wick rag, you could insert a lace, but adds a really nice volume. It works well if you have it adds a really nice detail, and it works well if you have a bit of volume. If you have tight sleeves, another really nice way of adding volume, again, you could do the frill or something, or lace. Quite often it's quite good if you do it right at the top, that works well, but moving it forward, it becomes much more noticeable. So you can have one slightly forward, one slightly back, because that is, of course, when if you look at somebody, that's actually really noticeable. What's really nice, if you move it slightly forward, you can also then just literally cut across your pattern, add seam allowance, same as into the sleeves, and you can again insert something, and you get something which could be either really romantic, you know, you could have some lace in there. You could, if you're working in a really nice chiffon or something, you could add a little sort of frill by just inserting curved pieces of fabric. But alternatively, if you do the same thing, but you use some piping, it suddenly becomes quite sporty, and you can. It also is the sort of 1960s Paco Rabanne, Courage, Space Age. So you can, it looks very neat, and it frames, and it's quite geometric and scientific. And of course, also, this is not related, this is now going to be a bit chatty. I've been looking at all the recent fashion BI graduate job for my teaching side of a job for fashion design, and it's really interesting because it's a real theme at the moment where you have painted garments where you paint the pattern on, and when you get quite conceptual garments, but we have these sort of painted lines which sort of, again, it defines the garment really nicely, and you can use piping to do the same. It's a little bit less conceptual, a little bit less avant-garde, but like that's what Courage, of course, was incredibly, you know, height of fashion. But just having binding or piping, either following the existing lines, or of course any seam you have on a garment or block, it doesn't have to be there. You can move it down, so there's a shoulder seam if you have a yoke, and when you have piping in there, it sort of defines, it structures your body and your garment really nicely. I mean, you could have one going down here, and then maybe even having one across, and it's a really nice way of adding interest. I mean, even going back to, I was looking at the MS for 1952, where they painted like the lapels and the buttons and the pockets and the stitching on garments, and then made really simple dresses, but it all has the same effect. It's sort of just it's a bit of top stitching, but more solid. It adds like a graphic element to your garment. It makes them look like a fashion illustration, so it's more defined. If you have a garment, it's just all white, it sort of become a bit flat. Depending on how you style, it can be beautiful and simplistic, but by adding lines, it becomes something else. So that's just a sort of way of thinking of it. The examples I've showed you just now with Georgia O'Keeffe and Vignette, they're very frilly, but if that's not your style, you can use the same technique but make it yours. And that's the fantastic thing about pattern cutting, designing, sewing your own clothes. it works exactly whatever your style is, vintage, contemporary, romantic, sportswear. It all is the same process. And I'm going to show you one more really nice quick detail again, talking about moving the seam, which is this buttonhole. The top one, you can literally just add a placket and put it in, and the bottom one is literally a seam. So if you go into our table, so again, if that's your pattern for the top one, they've done it easy, because of course normally you would just add a slit and then you would add a placket in there with our front, with our back. But what they've actually done, which is much easier, is that you actually cut out, and again you can see they've moved it forward slightly. You usually cut it out, and then you can easily, you have your placket which looks like that, and you can even iron over all your seam allowance and top stitch it in, or you can stitch one side and the other. But it's actually really straightforward, not a cheats version, but it's a really straightforward version of adding a placket. You don't have to have any slits or any turning, you just insert it, and it's a really neat way of doing it. And again, can you see it's moved slightly forward? Because again, that way you can actually see it. And the other one is actually a grown on sleeve, but it would work just as well on a grown on or on a satin sleeve. And again, what you do is you add, this is actually, it looks like on top of a shoulder, but whatever you do it, you draw on your button stand width, and then your front becomes this size, and then your back, I'm going to draw a different color, becomes this size. So you basically got this overlap. So instead of cutting it out, you basically overlap it. You just trace it, you trace around your back like this, and you also trace around your front like this, and you end up with this really nice overlap. And then of course what you can also do is you can add a facing, grown on facing. You just fold the paper along your edge and you cut it out as one, and that's a really nice detail. Again, doesn't really work with jackets on top, so it's perfect for summer styles. So these were my very varied pick and mix ideas for summer sleeves. One of the things quite a few of my lovely pattern cutting school students have asked about are tulip sleeves, and it's one of those things sometimes because some methods are all over the internet, so I never know whether you want me to also add my 2 pences worth, but I've now been asked by 2 people, so I'm actually going to do a tutorial for that. So if you want to join me on that on my pattern cutting school, the link is in the description, and I know some of you already students, so you will get a tutorial. I won't do the I will talk more about the drafting principles of replacing seams, because you can do the classic tulip sleeve you probably all seen quite recently. It's very pretty, which is why it's so popular, but you can also use it to do more, you know, more, you can do vintage styles like that. Again, it's just realizing that sleeves don't need to be that shape. That's just the starting, but I think because it wraps on our arm, it can be quite confusing about what happens if we replace a seam, you know, because it's sort of 3D. So I remember the first time on my pattern cutting degree at St. Martin's, we drafted a Pierre Cardin sleeve. I can show it to you. And it just completely boggled my mind, because it wasn't, even when you do your puff sleeve, a gathered sleeve, you're always staying in that sleeve shape and you're just cutting it or adding seams. But we did a sleeve which basically, hopefully I can find it. Here it is. I'm going to put the tape on quickly. It's this Pierre from the 60s, and can you see it goes above the shoulder line? It sort of goes halfway up the neck, and sort of trying to figure out how this was drafted was really mind-boggling. So you can see this is how I worked it out, and if you do it on paper, doing it on paper is actually, you know, if I did on film, it would be much easier. But trying to work out how it all works and how you can't go from your normal sleeve to a shape like that, it was really mind-boggling how you end up with a sleeve pattern like this, which is completely counterproductive to any sleeve you ever seen, but it gives you a really nice detail. But I think that's the sort of thing with sleeves. They're really hard because it's one piece which adds wraps around your whole 3D shape, so it's really hard to sort of sometimes work out. Oh, it doesn't need to be like that. It can become a completely different shape and it will still work as a sleeve. A little bit like this top. A rectangle will become a really nice soft gathered sleeves. So these are my ideas. I hope you might find some of them helpful, or you might inspire you to make something. If you do let me know. You know, tag me on Instagram, send me an email, or put it in the comments below. If you want a tutorial for this, do let me know. Or you might sort of all understood it, so if you're making your own, I'd love to see it. And Natalie is saying, oh, some great ideas, but I'll have to wait till December. Yes, sorry. You have that to look forward to. I'm hoping for sort of 2 months to wear some nice sleeves out. I'll be back next week at the same time. I might, because with Trisha a few weeks ago, I shared so many nice books. So I might do some more book reviews because I've done the vintage beginner books. I thought it might be nice to do some more advanced books, some sewing books. So let me know whether it's of interest of you. And the other thing I thought about doing was either swimwear patterns, because there's so many out there and so many like instructions and stuff. It's become a real trend. So if you want me to do a review of swimwear patterns and pattern hacks, because it is really easy. It's sold as really difficult, but it's, if you stitch jersey, swimwear is really straightforward, and it's a lot of fun, especially as a lot of nice swimsuits are incredibly expensive nowadays. So do let me know if you want that, or if you have a sewing pattern you want me to review or add pattern hacks to, do please share it, and I'm always happy to do a live stream on that. But that's it for me for this week, and I will see you all next week. Bye bye. Thank you so much for watching and joining me.